dispense with this actually. It's old style. It feels like a Quaker meeting house. So maybe if I can reach down into my ancestral inheritance and become a preacher, then I can do without the mic. But it's great to be here. I was a little bit late because there is another prospect place in Swansea. But I always thought Swansea was a city with prospects, plural, and now we know it's true. So apologies for that. But it's great to be here and on a night where we've had Yes Cymru rallies, meetings, festivals. Goodness sake, we have an indie fest in our capital city today. Yes, it's a feeling that the nation is coming alive. This nation that has long been dormant for many parts of its history is suddenly becoming vibrant in a way that hasn't been the case for many a year, and that's exciting. I think what's wonderful about Glyndwr Day is it reminds us of the importance in charting your future. One of the first things you often have to do is to look back, because that gives you a sense of direction. What do the old driving instructors say? First thing after putting your seatbelt on is check your mirrors. Yeah, in order to drive forward, you've kind of got to know where you come from, and so history is the resource, really, the raw material that we often use in understanding who we are, where we come from, and most importantly, where we're going. And Glyndwr, for us in particular, is a massive resource of hope because he did it. The longest unbroken rebellion against the English crown ever in history, in the entire world. And you've got to remember, we're talking about the British Empire here. They had a fair few rebellions. 21 years. It ended in 1421. And of course, we regained our independence for a good chunk of that. And so it's no surprise that we've gone back to Owain Glyndwr for our inspiration right throughout the 600 years that have followed. The poet Glyndwr was a soldier poet, yes? We've always had to multitask in Wales because no one thing has given us enough of a wage, But and he wrote a poem to Sean Mechan, and it includes this wonderful little couplet. A ni a gawn yn y gwirdd, o daw Owain fyd newydd, which roughly translates, those of us who live in the trees, if Owain was to return, we would have a new world, And that's been the hope for many of us, of course, because of what Owain Glyndwr and Welsh independence represents. He was actually specifically referring to Coed y Graig Lwyd, which is a little patch of forest still there, near Llanymynech, on the bordering, Powys on the English border. And it was a reference to Gwylltiad Glyndwr, the wild people of Glyndwr, I suppose, and particularly Llywelyn Abertawe. So after the end of the full War of Independence, of course, some people continued to fight on, and Llywelyn Abertawe was one of them. And they retired into the forest and into the mountains, but they fought on. As far as they're concerned, the War of Independence continued, and that struggle continues to this day, though thankfully by peaceful means. So I'd like to talk about three lessons that I think, three lessons that we can get from Glyndwr's example, and also three myths that we need to clear as well. Right? So the first one, and they're not the obvious ones possibly, the first one is that no one person will liberate a nation. Right? And this is quite an important myth to kill, particularly for us Welsh, and actually for all subject peoples. Subject peoples tend towards messianic thinking. Somebody's going to come on a white charge and liberate us and do all the hard work and heavy lifting, right? This, as a myth for us, as Celts and as a Welsh nation, has been around for some time. You can actually trace it back to an interesting guy called Carausius, who was a Celt. He was a member of the Belgic tribe, and he actually created an independent Britain in the middle of the Roman Empire. Forget taking on the British Empire, he took on the Romans, and he declared an independent Britain, when Britain, of course, was a Celtic nation in 286. And he used the myth of the son of prophecy, right? And in Welsh, we know that this is a Mab Darogan, right? So he was the first one, right? And he had coins printed, and he was a clever guy. He used, actually, it derives from Roman classical mythology. It actually isn't a Celtic idea. So he had coins minted with his, his face on it. Expectate Venice, which is a quote from the Aeneid, when he who is expected will come. Yeah. So this idea of the son of prophecy was there right from the 3rd century AD, and then you had Magnus Maximus leaving Wales after falling in love with Helen of Carnarvon, if you believe the Mabinogi, and etc. So this idea of the prince that would come back and liberate us became deeply embedded within Welsh mythology and Welsh psychology, and you saw then a whole series of sons of prophecy. The Magnificent Seven, you could say, right? Starting with Hirieth, Cynan, Arthur, King Arthur, Cadwaladr, Caractacus, and then the 3 Owains, Owain fab Urien, Owain Lawgoch, and Owain, finally Owain Glyndwr, right? So these 7 figures in Welsh literature and Welsh mythology are all performing that role of being the one that will come and liberate us. Often, of course, we're told in the mythology, sleeping on their swords in a cave somewhere in West Wales, or not. Well, I think it's West Wales. And the bell of destiny will ring out. They will ride out and drive the Saxons into the sea, or depending on the particular kind of mythology that you believe in, etc. Well, that's a pernicious myth, isn't it? When you think about it, there's something quite warming about it. R.S. Thomas talks about warming our hands at the red coals of history or something like that. But actually, of course, it liberates us in the wrong way. It liberates us from the responsibility that we have ourselves to liberate our nation collectively. So if we put our faith in a son or a daughter of prophecy, then that means that we don't have to do anything. We just have to wait. Well, we've been doing waiting now for many a century. And actually, that isn't the message. Or you would think that Owain Glyndwr became a symbol in some ways of that mythology, particularly, of course, because he was never captured, never killed. He disappeared into the mists of time, so he was very, very convenient then for that idea of myth, and all kinds of theories as to where he ended up. But actually, if you look at the practice of Owain Glyndwr, then the lesson you should draw is the opposite. Because here was a man that gathered around himself a collective. If you think of the team of people that he had, Griffith Young, his chancellor, the diplomats, John Trevor, the Bishop of St. Asaph, Lewis of Ieuan, the Bishop of Bangor, incredibly gifted diplomats. The military leaders, Rhys Gethin, Howell Cointmore, Rhys Lee, etc. It was a team effort, Glyndwr actually represented something that was bigger than himself, and he realised that. Right? So we will not liberate ourselves by putting our faith in a single liberator. And that's true for every nation that has liberated themselves. Think of the Irish. What actually achieved independence for Ireland was the fact that there was a generation of people, Collins, Connolly, De Valera, Griffith, Larkin, Mackiewicz, Pearce and Plunkett, all coming along together, and many, many others, many of them celebrated in Irish rebel songs, etc., who all actually contributed their unique skills to the task of liberating the nation. It is a collective effort, and we will need all of us to be part of that. So that's the first lesson. The second lesson, and I say this as a, I'm not a lifelong member of Plaid Cymru, I wasn't born into it, but I am a loyal member of my party. But no single party will liberate a nation. Nations are liberated by movements, not by single organizations. I think Pride has an important role to play, but it has a role to play among a wider firmament of organizations, and that's why the creation of Yes Cymru is so important, and the fact that Yes Cymru is non-party and all-party. And I've even heard of conservative members of Yes Cymru. They are very welcome. If you're amongst them, then you're very welcome as well. I like people who can contain within themselves contradictions. But no, the important point is that you cannot liberate a nation with you don't play golf with a single club. I don't play golf at all. You cannot do anything of any value with a single tool, right? You need the entire armory, and that is actually borne out as well. You need alliances. The history, and Glyndwr understood that. He formed, using those terrifically skilled diplomats that he had, he formed alliances with the King of France, with the King of Scotland, with a Pope. There were two popes at the time, but he got one of them at least. Pedro de Luna of Abertawe, who would actually now be in Catalonia, of course, and we send our message of solidarity out to the Catalan people facing the kind of oppression that they've only seen similar to the time they had in Franco. I mean, amazed to see sight in a Western European democratic country of the police raiding the press, threatening to arrest 700 mayors. It's quite incredible. And if you do have the opportunity, go to Catalonia on the weekend of October the 1st. Show your solidarity with them. It's important that we are there on the ground, because who knows what might happen. The Spanish army under the Constitution has the constitutional duty to protect the unity of the state, and I certainly hope that we will not see tanks rolling into Catalonia. But at the moment, who knows what might happen? So if you can go, then do. We've got to build alliances. That is the message of Glyndwr, and he did it on the island of Britain as well. He created an alliance, of course, with the Percys of Northumberland and with Edward Mortimer. Luckily, I think he was related through marriage there, but in order to create an alliance within the island of Britain as well. So there is, we have to unite our disparate forces, and that was the message in some ways of the coalition between Labour and Plaid Cymru in 2007, which wasn't perfect in many ways, but Cymru Ni, despite what Rodri Morgan, said in his posthumous biography, which has just been published, he didn't like Cymru Ni because he said it reminded him of Ein Volk, ein Reich, ein Führer. But Cymru Ni was a reference to Waldo Williams, but actually Waldo was quoting an earlier poem by Hywel ap Dafydd ap Ieuan ap Rhys, no Anglicisation of the name there, as you can see, who wrote a poem to celebrate William Herbert taking back Harlech Castle in 1486, and it's a kind of a reference as well to Owen Glyndwr. Harlech, of course, was going to be the capital of independent Wales. Cymro awna Cymru'n un, o deyrnoedd Lloegr aid arwyn. Yeah? So actually, though the Labour Party at the time might have been a little bit upset, Cymru Ni, that government was a reference to that actually earlier independence movement, and the understanding that one of the key tasks is unifying this extremely cantankerous and divisive nation that we have. There's a wonderful line by O.M. Edwards where he said, if Wales was flat, we'd have been independent by now. And about the size of Africa. But I think what he was referring to was, of course, the fact that the topography of Wales has led to a particularly peculiar form of parochialism in Wales. That, you know, I mean, I'm from Abertawe, and you know the kind of thing. I mean, it's repeated in all parts of Wales. You know, people from the top end of the Aman Valley would have fights with the people at the bottom end of the Aman Valley until the boys from Tyngle arrived, and then they fight, and then somebody would come from Neath, and then you know people would fight again. And we're like that, aren't we, as a nation? You know, there's more antipathy between the Rhondda Bach and the Rhondda Fawr until they meet somebody from Abertawe, you know, and that is something that we have to get beyond. And there have been few moments. Glyndwr actually is one of those few occasions, and obviously Llywelyn ap Griffith and Llywelyn Fawr, you know, were few of the other moments when we managed to unite as a nation. And so, you know, that's clearly absolutely essential. The need to see that what unites us as a nation is more important than divides us. And the third lesson, really, the third false myth is the idea that, you know, princes will liberate us, or that the liberation will come, I suppose, these days from, you know, party leaders or first ministers or whatever. You know, liberation never comes from the top down. Always comes from the bottom up. And the people often, when you talk about revolutionary moments, or you know, I don't mean that in a violent sense, but in the sense of a radical shift in a society, the people are always ahead of their leaders. The people lead. Real leaders become servants of the people in those circumstances. And I think that Glyndwr understood that, you know, and particularly, I think, in terms of Welsh culture, the democratic, egalitarian nature of our culture, you know. And so, what was at the heart of his War of Independence? You know, the pen and letter, a manifesto, you know, essentially, for a transformed nation. You know, incredibly ahead of its time, at a time when there were only 20 universities in the whole of Europe. The idea of creating as a priority for a man that was at war with the English crown, that had just borrowed hundreds of millions in order to fight him. A man that put as his priority the creation not just of one university. Wales was going to be a federal nation, a university for North Wales and South Wales, and also a church that was actually going to have as its officials people that actually, you know, spoke the language of the people. So here was somebody that understood that actually power actually came from the bottom up, it came from the people, and you know, he called, of course, two parliaments during the period of the War of Independence, and there were 4 people represented from every cwmwd or cwmote in Wales, the tiny communities, community councils now. So actually, you know, the Parliament of Wales was more represented than most county councils, you know, that Glyndwr called. And you've got to contrast that with what happened for the 120 years prior to Glyndwr, under the Normans. The Welsh had only even been invited twice in 120 years to the English Parliament. Invited, by the way, they weren't actually ever members of that Parliament in that period. So there was a sense, I think, with Glyndwr that he understood that actually government was by consent, and the power came from the Welsh people. It's reflected in right throughout the tradition of Welsh poetry, that actually, you know, praise poetry is such an important part of the Welsh literary tradition. But it was very, very seldom actually praise for bravery, which was the kind of chivalric tradition, which was the standard in the Middle Ages throughout the rest of Europe. It was praise for generosity. The real hallmark of a great lord to the Welsh, as reflected in their praise poetry, was how generous and fair they were to the people. And a great example of that is Iolo Goch's poem to Owain Glyndwr himself, where he says, ni bydd eisiau, talking of Glyndwr's course, ni bydd eisiau byddoseb, ni bydd eisiau na gwall, na newyn, na gwarth, na syched fydd and sychaf. Essentially, all the people's needs. There will be no famine. no disgrace, no thirst in Sychan, because at the heart of Glyndwr's vision was a vision for the people. It wasn't about, as Neil Kinnock and various other, I saw with horror actually, somebody tweeted a photograph of the GCSE curriculum saying, well, some people would say that, Owen Glyndwr was just a robber baron and he was basically just in it for himself. Well, I'm sorry, but, you don't unite a nation like Wales and sustain the war of independence that lasted for 21 years with some that never give up. You don't inspire that kind of loyalty if all you are is just like the rest, just in it for themselves. Here was a man that, the circumstances that led up to his decision to rebel were personal. But actually, I think he discovered in the moment that he created and in the movement that he created something that he realized was much, much bigger than himself. And I think that's what is exciting, that's what excites us now, is that we are actually part of that living tradition. There will, in our period, since in the 600 years that we've lost our independence, there will only be one generation that will be able to say, we won it back. What a great thing to, I'm not in favour of bragging, but what a great thing to be able to say that we were there. We were part of that generation, and I genuinely feel it is there for us. I don't underestimate the challenges. I don't underestimate the constraints. All of us who live in this country understand, as already been referenced, the manacled mind, the fact that we have an internalized colonialism. The biggest internal colonialism is the one in our own heads. That's where we all have to start. Is we have to liberate ourselves and liberate our own thinking. And as we were saying earlier, the taboo, actually almost like coming out for Welsh independence. I've done a bit of coming out in my time, but coming out as a Welsh nationalist is difficult enough. And actually just saying it, and saying it unabashed, and saying it proudly and confidently, not necessarily aggressively, but quietly, but solidly, and saying that, no country ever ruled another well. This is not a radical demand. It is a modest demand to say that we would like to be owners of our own destiny and fate as a nation of citizens. So I think that I think we will get there. I think, as inevitable, we will get there by a zigzag path. I can't predict you when, and I can't predict you exactly how, but I'm certain of this. There is rising up now within us all, I think, a new spirit which has the inspirational power, every bit as strong as that which was coursing through the veins of Glyndwr and his greater collective all those years ago.